Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to Cooperstown, New York, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, a beautiful fall afternoon. We thank you for joining us, our first virtual author series of the program. We're glad that you could be with us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. I work in the Hall of Fame's Education Department. And today we'll kick off our virtual author series for the fall. Joining us today via the wonders of Zoom is Danny Gallagher. Danny has written 10 books, and from 2020 to 2024, he wrote a book a year, each about the Montreal Expos franchise. Today with Danny, we'll be discussing his most recent book from 2024. It's got kind of a long title, so I might need to take a breath here. It's called Explosion, Genesis to Relocation, 1994 Saga Contraction, Revelations about the Dying Days, Moises, Lenny, Schneids, and the Expos. When it came out, this book recognized two anniversaries, the 20th anniversary of the franchise being relocated from Montreal to Washington, D.C., and also the 30th anniversary of that ill-fated strike-shortened season, 1994, which denied the Expos their chance. A lot of people thought they had a really good chance of reaching the World Series. So we're very glad to have with us today, maybe the leading authority on Montreal Expos history, Danny Gallagher. Danny, welcome to the virtual author series. How are you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bruce. I know that you are very authoritative on baseball yourself. You're a great writer and researcher, and it's great to be in your company today.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And we're glad to have an opportunity to talk to you. This, as we said, is the first of our virtual author series for the fall. We'll have more on upcoming guests on a later broadcast. But I do want to mention that we're also going to do a couple of virtual programs related to our Japanese baseball exhibit, our Yaku baseball exhibit, which looks at the really exchange of baseball between America and Japan. We have a program on Wednesday, October 22nd with Leon and Leron Lee, two brothers, American players who went to Japan, became superstars there. And then on Thursday, November 6th, we'll talk to Rob Fitz about his new book. Rob is one of the leading authorities on Japanese baseball. So that's going to be coming up. But today, our topic of conversation will be the history of the Montreal Expos with Danny Gallagher, who is an avid fan, an avid historian. And Danny, I'm really curious how this all started for you. How did you become so interested in this Expos franchise?
I guess it all happened in the 70s and in 1969 when the Expos became an expansion franchise. I grew up near Ottawa, near Montreal in Ontario. So I grew up an Expos fan and went to a number of their games, taking the bus from Ottawa to Montreal, would listen to a lot of the games on radio. So I had a good acknowledgement of the Expos growing up. And then when I became a beat writer for the Montreal Daily News in 1988, that's when my passion for the Expos electrified.
How long did you cover the Expos?
I covered them about 6 years in Montreal, and then more after I moved to Toronto as a freelance writer, and then continuing to write a number of books. See, my first book on the Expos was in 1997, and then wrote another book with Bill Young in 2005, and then another book with Bill in 2015 about the 94 Expo. And then the next group of books that you talked about from 20 to 24. And then in 2018, Bruce, I also wrote a book, Blue Monday, about the 1981 Expos.
Mm. You know, I'm always curious to talk to beat writers about that job because I think a lot of people think it's glamorous and romantic. I know I used to think that. And then I started talking to beat writers about how it's not that easy. There's so much travel. There's so much news day to day. You're constantly alert. You have to be alert to what's going on. it's a long baseball season, lots of travel, very physically demanding. You did it for 6 years, which is probably about 5 more years than I could have done it. How did you deal with all the physical and mental demands of being a beat writer for a major league franchise?
Well, it was like I guess, an afternoon job from about 3 to 11 or 12 at night. And you're going to the ballpark long before the game even starts to check in with the manager, whoever it is, at his meeting in his office. And then you go around and talk to various players about features or sidebars, before the game even starts. So you have a story or two in mind before the game actually starts. And during the game, you're writing that sidebar at the computer. So that's the sort of the drift of how, a beat writer even works. And of course, even during the day while you're at home, you might be thinking of something and making contact calls to agents or people in the game for scoops or nuggets or stuff like that. So sometimes it's sort of like consuming a good part of the day. And then, there's very few off days and there's a fair amount of traveling. And, but there's a lot of fun associated to it as well, Bruce.
Yeah. You liked being a beat writer?
Oh, yeah. To be honest, see, when I got on the beat, that really, as I said before, magnified my passion for the Expos and getting to know some of those guys who I'd followed in the newspapers or went to see them in person, like Rusty Staub and Ellis Valentine and Tim Wallach and Tim Raines and Darren Fletcher. And the guy who I'm still fairly close to is Dennis Martinez, who we got to know each other in 1988, and we've been communicating off and on every year since then. So he's one of my favorite players, tied with Rusty Staub. Rusty Staub's real name is Daniel Joseph, which is my real name. And of course, Rusty was one of the early franchise heroes, and then Dennis came on and was a tremendous pitcher and had the perfect game on July the 28th, 1991.
Yeah. Dennis Martinez was a terrific pitcher. He's somewhat forgotten today. He's overshadowed by the other Martinez for the Expos, Pedro. But Dennis Martinez, in his own right, was a very, very fine pitcher, had a tremendous career and some of his best seasons with the Expos. Now, I have to ask you this, Danny. 5 books in 5 years. How in the world did you manage to do that?
Well, excuse me, it took me maybe like 12 months of research and writing and editing and rewriting and editing. It took a fair amount of work. It takes contacts to get a hold of the player or the manager of the old coaches to put together a book. Sometimes I have my own contact list from many years ago, and then sometimes Martin Peters, the Expos alumni person, would have numbers to help me, or I might just track down a player through Googling and read Sabre stories and find out where they might be living, and then do that person's name at 411.com. And then you might find some phone numbers. So that's how it works. But the researching is a lot of work. But the real part is actually writing the book. It's very time consuming, but a lot of fun.
12 months a year for 5 years. So there was really no break for you.
Well, I spent a fair amount of time with my wife and get out and do some shopping and so on. Yeah.
But you love what you do, and even though there is a tremendous time commitment, when you love it, when you enjoy working, like for me here at the Hall of Fame, the days do go by a little bit quicker. It doesn't seem as much work as maybe other jobs. You've written so many books on the Expos, many different angles, different areas of history that you've explored. What, Danny, sets this book apart? This book called Explosion, with that longer title, which I won't go through again. What sets Explosion apart from your other volumes on the Expos?
I wanted to pay tribute to the 1994 team that was 74-40, and then got screwed by the strike and the cancellation of the season. And then I wanted to pay tribute to the final season, which was 2004, which was very upsetting. The final home game on September the 29th, 2004, and then the final game ever on October the 3rd, 2004 at Shea Stadium. So what I wanted to do is also do an investigation of the final day, the previous day, the final days, the final weeks, because up until September 28, September 28, 2004 is when I was told that the team, the rumor was spreading around in Montreal during and after a game that the Expos were going to be moved to Washington. And then the official announcement was made in Montreal on September the 29th, 2004. So I got a hold of some of the people who, have not been talked to or interviewed too much. One was Bob Dupuy, who is the Bud Selig's president and chief operating officer at Major League Baseball. And he was kind enough to tell me to go through the sad days of the Expos at the end, the final months. He said that nobody, as we all know, no owner could be found to buy it back from Major League Baseball, which owned the team from 2002 to 2004. And Bob also pointed out, which we all know, that the lack of a suitable new facility in Montreal was a major factor in moving the team. The Olympic Stadium had become very obsolete, and Bob told me that they talked about Portland and Washington and Virginia and Nashville and Charlotte, North Carolina, but they finally decided on Washington. Now, Bob told me they had a committee, relocation committee, which included Bud Selig's daughter, Wendy Selig Queen, and a number of other people, including John McHale Jr., the son of John McHale Sr., one of the pioneers of the Expos going way back in 68 and 69. It was kind of ironic that I'm talking to John McHale Jr., who on a relocation committee to relocate his father's franchise. It was kind of weird talking, but that's what I want to do, to kind of explore the final days and months and years of the Expos.
So even though, Danny, this was difficult to write about because these are anniversaries involving negative occurrences, your motivation to do some investigative reporting, that's really what drove you to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. See, part of the subtitle of Genesis to Relocation. I like to call myself an investigative reporter and, investigative author. So I wanted to try to talk to as many people like Bob Dupuy and Corey Bush, who was formerly on the executive board of the San Francisco Giants, and to get a sense of how this was going down, the demise of the franchise. You see, interesting, Bruce, that up until the last couple of days of the 2004 season, the Expos were on the 2005 schedule. So it was all kind of a shock at the end that, after years of rumors that the Expos were going to be moved, it was finally coming to fruition that they were actually going to be moved. So it was very, very sad.
Yeah. We're going to get into some detail on what happened at the end and also talk about the 1994 strike. But I want to go back in time. I want to go back to the roots of the franchise, which began in 1969. So the Expos end up hiring Gene Mauch, who had become available in June of 68 when he was fired by the Phillies after a long tenure there. Mauch had been and has been lauded as a highly intelligent man, a brilliant tactician. Some have given credit to him for inventing the double switch, among other strategies. But he was also criticized for too much of a reliance on the bunt, too much of a reliance on small ball, and ultimately for an inability to lead any of his teams to a pennant. So I'm curious, Danny, where do you stand on the legacy of Gene Mauch?
Well, he was a really smart man who, was ahead of his game. He loved the small ball. He didn't really care that much for the long ball. So when he came on board, the Expos roster was very middling and not that full of many stars, except maybe, for Rusty Staub, who was still in his prime. But a lot of older players that they got through the expansion route in 1968. And Gene wanted to win every game. So in 69 to 75, he was trying to win every game and usually going with the older players and the younger players, maybe didn't get used as much. He was a disciplinarian. He loved that every player, if they're in the dugout, had to be wearing a hat. You couldn't be sitting on the bench and just showing your hair. And sometimes if he didn't like the look of your socks, he'd tell the guy to go to the clubhouse and change his stirrups.
Wow.
I was able to talk to his daughter, Leanne Simons. I think it's the first time that she has ever talked to a writer or an author. So she gave me some insight into Gene Mauch, who absolutely was immersed in baseball every day that he managed. Somebody asked him one time, what do you like reading as a possible angle for a story? And Gene said, I love reading the box score.
Yeah.
So Gene was really, really smart. He was ahead of his game.
After a rough year as an expansion team, they win only 52 games. Not saying that's Mauch's fault because, expansion teams, they do not have the pick of the litter. And then after that, he consistently managed the Expos to seasons in which they would be close to 500. They'd win 70 to 79 games, but they never actually reached 500. Do you think the Expos, in retrospect, should they have been better under Gene Mauch, or did he get as much from them as he could?
I think they could have been better. I'm just wondering if they could not have maybe let him go earlier than 1975. He had a pretty good run at it.
Yeah.
For all those seasons, and then they finally decided to let him go and replace him with Kyle Keel, who was another kind of a disciplinarian, and that move did not work out very good. And then, they hired Dick Williams for the 1977 season. But, the Expos had a pretty decent team in 73 and even got close to the NL East near the end, but then they faded and didn't quite make it. But I think they probably could have played a little bit better under Gene, yes.
Yeah. Well, really, Dick Williams was the first manager who would have success there and ultimately would lead them to some playoff baseball. I want to talk a little bit, Danny, about the first ballpark that the Expos played in. And certainly Expos fans, diehards like yourself, know about Jerry Park and remember, but it's maybe not that well known to a lot of fans outside of Montreal. So the Expos played their home games at this previously very small stadium. It had like 3,000 fans. And then they expanded the capacity to about 28,000 for the first season. And they ended up playing there from 1969 to 1976. I imagine, Danny, you went to a number of games there.
It was a very romantic, nostalgic ballpark, very, very close to the stands. The players could go over to the stands and shake hands
Hmm.
and sign autographs, and a cozy ballpark that was approved by Major League Baseball. Oh, in the summer or fall of 1968, the Expos had to make a lot of improvements to Jerry Park to make it compatible for Major League Baseball, and it turned out to be pretty good. It was, an open air stadium, um, a lot of nostalgic for the fans who came because this was the maiden franchise playing out of a small ballpark. It was really quite a unique setting before they went to Olympic Stadium.
So you really like this ballpark?
Oh yeah, it's. I think something like that. If they could get something like that in downtown Montreal for a new ballpark, if it ever happens, it's
Yeah.
that kind of a setting, but would have to make it more modern than it is in those particular years.
As we see in the image here, it really did have an old school look to it. It looked like something out of the 1940s and 50s. Small single deck stadium, really no covering in any area. I imagine on a sunny, hot day, it could have gotten pretty warm there, but night games probably would have been a little bit more comfortable. It was a grass field. You mentioned that the players are close to the fans and vice versa. So there was an opportunity for fans to talk to players prior to games. So I'm wondering, Danny, in retrospect, do you think it was a mistake for the Expos to move out of this ballpark after 76 and move into Olympic Stadium?
Well, Olympic Stadium was built for the Olympics in 1976, so that was the city of Montreal's contribution to a setting for the Expos. So the majority owner, Charles Brompton, pretty much had to go with what the city was offering him. So it was, even though Olympic Stadium was enclosed and cavernous, it was probably an improvement from Jerry Park. But not, ideally, I think an outdoor setting, would be better for the Expos. And I know that Charles Brompton really didn't like Olympic Stadium, but they couldn't do much about it because it cost a lot of money, so much money to build it. It was over budget so many times,
Hmm.
and so they really had to be stuck with Olympic Stadium.
Yeah. I remember at the time when the Expos moved in, people talked about, oh, Olympic Stadium, this is a state of the art stadium that's being fitted to play baseball. But it was an odd fit for baseball, especially when they created the opening in the middle of the roof. You'd watch games on television. You'd be in extreme sunlight, one half of the field, extreme shadows, almost like it was nighttime darkness, the other half of the field. It was really, I never was there, but watching it on TV, it was hard to follow the game because of the extreme sun, the extreme shadows. It just was a weird fit for baseball.
Yeah, they had all those root problems, open it and trying to close it, and it was a real fiasco. They tried different ways to improve the situation years ago, but see, right now they're fixing the roof and the inner workings of the underneath the roof to make it more compatible. Right now, they're saying it's only compatible for soccer and football.
Mm.
But they also say that if somehow Major League Baseball came back, that it could be reconverted, configured to baseball, for several years before they would build a new stadium downtown. But that's all hypothetical.
Yeah.
Right now, there's no majority owner or anybody interested in pursuing a new team.
One other thing about this ballpark, I've heard that the artificial turf was incredibly hard on players' knees. Andre Dawson was a guy who had some problems there. So this was probably not beloved by the players.
No, ideally, it would be the new park, I think, would obviously be a regular playing field, regular turf, regular grass. And Dawson's knees were really, really bad after playing 10 plus years in Montreal. So if they got a new team, there would be a regular grass for sure.
Yeah. Another thing I want to talk about with Expos history, which I find fascinating, and that is this logo, this iconic Expos logo. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. And I think at one time, the Expos franchise, they explained that this logo that we see here is really composed of three letters, the largest of which is the stylized M for Montreal. But then within that, you have the lower left of the logo, what appears to be a lowercase e for Expos. And then on the right side of the logo in blue is the letter B, and the Expos said that was for baseball. So that was one theory. But then there were other theories. One is that that red E was actually a C. And then on the right, you have the B. So it's CB for the team owner, Charles Bronfman, the Expos' first owner. Still another theory is that no, it's not a C, it's an E, and the E is for Ellen, the B is for Bronfman, that's the daughter of the team owner, Charles Bronfman. I've even read one theory that you could look and say it's ELB, E for Expos, L for League, B for baseball. Can you clarify for us once and for all, what's the true meaning of this logo? What's the right way to interpret it?
I'm going from what Charles Bronfman, how he explained it to me a few years ago. Somebody, I approached him, look at Charles, people are thinking that the E stands for Charles. Can you explain that? And he said it had nothing to do with his name. It's he tried to explain that at the M, Montreal, the B, baseball, and C, Montreal Baseball Club, which was the actual name of the company that took on the franchise, Montreal Baseball Club. You see, the red looks like an E, which would mean Expos. So there's different ways of trying to interpret that. But the way Charles presented it, it was Montreal Baseball Club, and that he had nothing to do with any initials involving him.
Danny, do you think if the Expos get a franchise, and assuming they're still going to be called the Expos second time around, do you think they have to go with this logo because it is so iconic, so popular?
I think that they probably would go with it. It's owned by Major League Baseball. It would just be a matter of getting permission from Major League Baseball to use that logo. You see, the logo and the merchandise and the shirts and the whatever sweaters and that you see around North America and maybe some places in the world, the Expos logo is still very, very popular, even though they've been gone for 21 years.
Yeah.
It is a fascinating logo for sure.
I did a plaque gallery tour this morning, and that's one of my duties during the fall. We still get a lot of people during the fall months, September and October. We get a lot of people on our morning plaque gallery tour, and sure enough, there was a fan there with a Montreal Expos cap, and I didn't have a chance to talk to him and tell him about this program today, but we do see that Expos cap, that Expos logo, even though it's been now more than 20 years since the franchise existed in Montreal. I wanted to talk, Danny, about some of the people you interviewed for the book. And we're going to talk about a few people, but one of the guys that really stood up as an excellent source for you is this guy, a journeyman catcher named Brian Schneider. But in terms of interviews, much more than a journeyman performer for you.
Yeah, Brian Schneider was what I call maybe a plumber and a grinder with the Expos. A good, solid catcher who wasn't a star, but he was very good with the pitchers. The pitchers loved him because he's a good framer, good game caller, good at blocking the ball. He was like a kind of a hero to the pitchers because, and he told me that if a pitcher lost a game, he felt like he was losing the game too because he was the catcher. So it was very important for him to be involved in trying to help the Expos win. He was, see, in a lot of my books, Bruce, I like to play or talk about the part-time player or the player who is not a star. They don't have to be stars to be in my books. Brian Schneider fit the mold of a solid player who did wonders to help the Expos.
And obviously a thoughtful, insightful guy that was really helpful to you.
Yeah, he was like a captain of the team. The catcher is like the captain of the team because he controls or helps to control the pitchers and helps to develop a relationship with the pitchers in terms of what they're going to be throwing on a certain pitch to a certain batter. Yeah, Schneider was a pretty solid catcher.
Yeah. He must have enjoyed his time in Montreal.
Yeah, he sure did. See, near the end, he loved it through all of his time because he was also the player rep who had to tell the players that the team was moving there in 2004. But in 2002 and 2003, 2004, two of those years that the team was basically told by Major League Baseball that they're playing some of the home games in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So he had to arrange, travel and accommodations along with the travel secretary to, it was like a healing time for the players for him to, this is a tough thing to go to Puerto Rico because we have to do our best and this is the predicament we're in, but we're going to have to do our best to put a good time on the field.
You mentioned you like the journeyman players, the guys who are in a sense the foot soldiers. And I enjoy that aspect of it too. One of the names in the title of your book is Lenny, and that's Lenny Webster. Tell us about him.
Yeah, Lenny Webster was another catcher who was a solid catcher for the Expos, more part-time, whereas Brian was more, full-time. But Lenny Webster was so good at catching pitches, just like Brian was. He was like an underdog who was very appreciated by the pitchers. He was Jeff Vassell's personal catcher, in those years that he caught for the Expos. And very intriguing background. And, Lenny Webster grew up in Chicago, and he told me one of the stories about going to McDonald's with his parents, and he was asked by his mother to bring home a breakfast. And he got the breakfast, and he got outside the McDonald's, and some guys stole the food from him, and he had to go home and tell his mother that, "Mom, some guy stole the food from me." And he was saying that incident helped him grow up real quick. And Yeah, Lenny Webster is really an amazing catcher, really great part-time player.
Yeah. Was his mother upset with him?
No, she accepted his explanation, and she just had to live with it.
Yeah.
You know, here's an interesting story too. Is Rick DeHart of Topeka, Kansas. So he read an ad in the weekly newspaper called Baseball Weekly, uh, which was a subsidiary of USA Today. It's not in business anymore, I don't think. But he read an ad in the Baseball Weekly sometime in the mid 1990s that there was a tryout camp in Florida. So he took a Greyhound bus to Florida, if you can believe that, to this camp. And somebody from the Expos saw him and signed him. They gave him no money, if you can believe that. He had no signing bonus. They gave him a jacket and a pair of cleats. But he went on to, pitch a fair number of games in the majors, and he got himself a pension. So that kind of story really digs at my heart.
Yeah. Who was the pitcher again?
Rick DeHart,
Wow.
D-E-H-A-R-T. Yeah, he didn't play that long, but he got enough to earn a Major League Baseball pension.
Yeah, and that can be a pretty valuable thing. Danny, who are some of the other people you interviewed for the book that you really found intriguing and insightful?
One guy, Don Stanhouse, it took a long time to convince Don to do an interview, but he finally did one. He told a story that when he came to the Expos, Charles Bronfman was the heir to the Seagram's whiskey dynasty.
Yeah.
So one day he got introduced to Charles Bronfman, and Charles asked Don, "What are you drinking right now?" And Don said, "I'm drinking scotch." Well, Charles said, "Well, you're not drinking scotch anymore. You're going to drink Crown Royal rye whiskey." So the next day, Charles Bronfman had a case of 24 bottles of rye Crown Royal delivered to Don Stanhouse's locker.
Yeah. Stanhouse is
like Don
great
Stanhouse's nickname was Full Count. The Baltimore Orioles manager, Earl Weaver, nicknamed him because he took so much time in between pitches.
Yeah.
So that's my little story on Don Stanhouse.
Yeah, he had a couple of other nicknames too. He was called Full Pack because he made Earl Weaver smoke during the game in the dugout. Weaver was always so nervous because Stanhouse, as you said, did take a long time in between pitches. He was pretty wild. And he also had the great nickname as well, Stan the Man Unusual. Anyone else you talked to that you really liked?
An interesting guy. He was he's no longer living, but I found out that 1970 Expos player Joe Sparma played with NFL great receiver Paul Warfield, who played with the Dolphins and the Cleveland Browns. So this is one of my coups for this book, was to get Paul Warfield on the phone, one of the great NFL players. So he talked about Joe Sparma. Paul Warfield played against Joe Sparma in high school baseball, but they both were teammates at Ohio State.
Yeah.
Under the great coach there.
Woody Hayes. Woody Hayes. Yeah.
Now, Joe Sparma never did get to quarterback much at Ohio State, but Paul Warfield got a lot of playing time, went on to a great career in the NFL. But Joe Sparma, when he got to the Expos, you could hardly throw a strike. He was pretty good with the Tigers, and then when he got the Expos, he had this what they call the yips. syndrome,
Yeah.
where you could never throw a strike. A lot of pitches went over the screen, over the home plate. And so that caused his demise with the Expos Major League Baseball because he couldn't throw a strike.
Yeah, he had been a very good pitcher with the Tigers, as you mentioned, and sadly, as I recall, he ended up dying very young, not that long after his playing career came to an end. All right, let's get to the two big issues that really are themes in the book. First, the 1994 strike. So, at the time of the strike, which occurred after the games of August 11th in 1994, the Expos had a record of 74-40. It was the best record in baseball, and they had a 6-game lead in the National League East over the Atlanta Braves. Those Expos had probably the best outfield in baseball. Moises Alou, Marquise Grissom, Larry Walker, the Hall of Famer. And they had a pitching staff headlined by Pedro Martinez, Ken Hill, and Jeff Fassero, whom you mentioned earlier. What's your hunch, Danny? If there had not been a strike, you think the Expos would have held on, won the division? I mean, who knows in short series what would have happened? So I'm not going to ask you about the World Series and whether they would have made that. But do you think they would have held the division for the rest of the season?
It would have created a dynasty in Montreal if they'd been able to keep that team. They had already started it in 1992 with a great rebound after Tom Reynolds was fired and Philippe Alou took over as the manager. 1993 was an excellent team, almost as good as the one in 94. If they had not been canceled by the strike and cancellation of the season, the Expos ownership group would have been able to afford to keep some of those guys because they would have created a lot of revenue in the playoffs and possibly the World Series in order to give these players multi-year contracts like John Wetland and Marquise Grissom and Ken Hill and Larry Walker. But the strike put a kibosh on any chance of a dynasty. The strike continued from August of 1994 until April of 1995. There was no revenue coming into the Expos all that winter. It was just really, really awful, really sad. And then when the strike was settled, or the owners were told to end the strike, or the players were told to end the strike, Claude Boucher, the managing general partner of the Expos, instructed general manager Kevin Malone to trade Ken Hill, John Wetland, and Marquise Grissom, and he told Malone not to offer Larry Walker a contract, who was sort of like a pending free agent.
Yeah.
And Walker wasn't offered arbitration, so he became a free agent and he signed with Colorado. And then the Expos ended up trading Grissom, Walker, and Wetland, and it was a real disaster. You know, 1995 was just a bare resemblance of the 1994 team. If they'd been able to keep going and there was no strike, I think they probably would have been able to get the momentum going to build a new stadium downtown Montreal.
Yeah. I remember watching the team in 94, especially when they played the Mets, and those games would be on television in the New York market. This was such a dynamic team. They had guys with speed and power and athleticism. They had a power pitching staff. They had two great relievers in Wetland and Mel Rojas. They had a great manager in Felipe Alou. I mean, this was a phenomenal club. And by mid-season, by mid-July, people were talking about the Expos as the favorite, maybe not only to reach the World Series, but to win it all. And then, as you say, they didn't just selectively get rid of a few guys to make things more affordable in terms of payroll. They basically got rid of everybody. And when you get rid of everybody, a shell is left. It's a real shame.
Yeah, you see, that particular team, I called it firework in baseball. As you say, the offense was awesome. They had great offense, great defense, great starting pitching, and a wonderful bullpen. A catcher in Darren Fletcher and Lenny Webster to back up. And it created a lot of excitement in Montreal that year. A lot of walk-up crowds. They only sold about 8,500 season tickets, but in the few weeks heading into the strike, there was a lot of excitement and a lot of people buying walk-up tickets because they saw so much excitement in the team. They saw the possibility of them going into the postseason. There's no guarantee that they would ever win a World Series, but they certainly had the equipment and the team to make the postseason and do some damage.
And attendance in 1995, it fell off a cliff, right?
Yeah, they didn't have a very good record. They had a decent team, and in 1996 they made a decent play for the National League East title, but they were really hurt by the absence of those four guys that we talked about.
Yeah.
But Moises stayed around until 1996, and Mel Rojas, the pitcher, stayed around until 1996. But by that time, they were getting very expensive too for the Expos payroll. So
yeah,
the Expos didn't make a big attempt to try to sign them again.
And within a few years, we have this situation, relocation. So Major League Baseball in 2001, the end of the 2001 season, really made it clear that they wanted to contract two teams. They wanted to eliminate two teams, one of them being the Expos, the other being the Minnesota Twins. That actually did not happen. Instead, Jeffrey Loria sold the Expos to MLB, which operated the franchise for 3 seasons, splitting the home games between Montreal and San Juan, Puerto Rico, kind of an odd split, two geometrically opposed areas. And then by the end of the 2004 regular season, after 3 years of MLB running this franchise, Major League Baseball announced that the decision had been made to relocate the franchise to Washington. So we look at this downward spiral. In your mind, there's no question it all began with the ill-fated 1994 season. If that strike doesn't happen, if that interference doesn't happen, the Expos are probably still in Montreal. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
Yeah, for sure. I think, as I said, if they were able to continue that season in 1994, that dynasty of players would have continued for a few years, and they would have been able to sign all those guys to contract extensions of 3 or 4 years, or maybe even 5 or 6. But they really had no revenue in the winter of 94, 95. And even in 1994, Claude Brochu was telling me just before the season started that the Expos had very little money. Mm-hmm. They were like almost bankrupt before the 94 season even started.
Wow.
Because it was a minority committee of owners running the team with Brochu, the majority managing general partner, who made all the decisions.
Yeah.
So he was the one who decided that these guys had to be traded. But yes, if they had kept that team, very likely that the Expos would still be in Montreal today.
Danny, why did Major League Baseball decide to go to San Juan, Puerto Rico? What was the attraction there? Did they think that could be a potential full-time location for a franchise? What were they thinking there?
Yeah, they wanted to move there to see if that was a possible future franchise in Major League Baseball, but they also wanted to get more revenue out of the Expos to pay bills those 2 years, because of the, attendance wasn't that great in Montreal in the dying years. So it was a move by Major League Baseball to go into San Juan and generate more revenue to pay bills, to pay the players, pay travel expenses, and so on.
How did the Expos draw in San Juan?
I believe it was like around 20,000 a game.
So not bad, but not great.
No, it was, I suppose, middling crowds. I think they hoped that it would be better, but
Yeah. So 21 years later, we look back at this. It seems for me, it seems more than 21 years. The Expos, for some reason, they're a distant memory in my mind. Even though you probably have a different thought on that. What's the feeling in Montreal now? Do enough fans or do a lot of fans want to have baseball back? Do they still care? Have they lost interest? What's the general sentiment? If you were to take the temperature of Montreal baseball fans, what would it be?
yeah, in a few years ago, the Blue Jays used Montreal and Olympic Stadium for some exhibition games for a number of years, and it really showed Major League Baseball that Montreal and even Plattsburgh, New York, and so on could support Major League Baseball in Montreal. Fans would be coming from Toronto and other parts of Ontario and Canada. And I think that Major League Baseball would succeed in Montreal. Right now, Bruce, there's no Major League owner interested in getting involved in the team. There's no talk of a new stadium, but I'm part of a group called Players on Deck Working Group. We're trying to get investors involved in getting a team back. So far, we were unable to secure any investors, but we've been meeting since September 30th, 2024, and we're still trying to get investors. We have a few years before the projected expansion date of 2029. So be interesting to see what happens. Now, as you probably know, there's a documentary coming out very soon, later this month, and it's titled What Happened to the Montreal Expos, or Who Killed the Montreal Expos. So it will be detailed based on a lot of interviews who what contributed to the Expos' demise.
Yeah. You talk about a possible expansion franchise in 2029, but you've got a couple franchises now. The Tampa Bay Rays have had major problems. One of their ballparks badly damaged in major storms. We don't know when exactly they're going to be able to return to Tropicana Field, maybe next year, but I don't know that's 100% certain. We know the Oakland A's became the Athletics, playing in Sacramento in the short term, eventually hoping to make it to Las Vegas. What about those two franchises? Is there any interest in trying to maybe bring one of those franchises to Montreal, or is everything set on an expansion team?
Well, an attempt was made in a few years ago by Charles Bronfman's son, Stephen Bronfman, who liked the idea of the sister city concept, whereby 41 home games would be played in Montreal and 41 or 40 in Tampa Bay. And Bronfman liked that idea, but the major league owners turned it down. And since January of 2022, there has been no talk of anybody interested in bringing baseball back to Montreal, but our committee will try to see if we can bring in some investors.
Do you think that idea could work?
It would need about $2.3 billion for an expansion franchise and about $1 billion US to build a new stadium. I think the younger generation is really attuned to the Expos returning along with the older crowd, the baby boomers from many years ago. I think it could work with a new, like a season ticket package, a corporate package. It would really have to be sold to the public, really, to make it successful.
Yeah. Our guest has been the prolific Expos historian and author, Danny Gallagher. This, the most recent of 5 books in 5 years. This came out in 2024. It's a really fun read. Explosion, the Genesis to Relocation, 1994 Saga Contraction, etc. So many things covered in this book. And if anybody is available or if anybody's interested in getting the book, it is available at Amazon.com. And it's a book that comes highly recommended. It's drawn rave reviews. We really appreciate Danny for all of his writing and for joining us here on the Virtual Author Series. I've heard so much about you, Danny, for so many years. I'm glad I've finally had the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, Bruce. Thanks so much for talking about the Expos and a great month, October baseball. What a better time to talk about the Expos than October.
Absolutely. And even though the Expos don't have a team now, there's a rich history there, and Danny has explored it so well for us on this show and in his many books as well. Our thanks to Danny Gallagher. Our thanks to everybody else for joining us for this program. We really appreciate you being with us. We hope you have a great afternoon, a great fall as this playoff season does continue. Thanks for joining us from here in Cooperstown. That'll do it for this edition of the Virtual Author Series. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.